The gallery fell silent the moment the words left his son's mouth. "You go to hell," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking like thin ice beneath weight, and the judge's gavel came down with a sound that echoed through Brian's chest like a final heartbeat. 55 years old, and Brian Caldwell had never heard his son speak to him, to anyone, with such unfiltered contempt. Not even during the worst years. Not even when Marcus was 17 and thought his father had ruined everything that mattered. The courtroom erupted. Officers moved forward. Marcus was already standing, his tie loosened, his jaw clenched, so tight Brian could see the muscle working from 3 rows back. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second, long enough for Brian to see that his son didn't recognize him anymore. That was the real verdict, delivered before any judge could speak. Brian had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment, for the testimony, for the inevitable clash of versions. What he hadn't prepared for was how much his body would betray him when it finally happened. His hands shook. His throat closed. He couldn't swallow. The trial was about money, ostensibly. It was about the mismanagement of Marcus's inheritance from his mother's estate, about how Brian had made certain decisions regarding assets without consulting his son, about trust broken and documents signed. But everyone in that courtroom, every juror, every attorney, the judge herself, understood that the real trial had nothing to do with mathematics or fiduciary duty. It was about a father who had become a stranger to his own child, and a son who had decided the gulf between them was too wide to cross. Brian had been a good provider. This was indisputable. He had paid for Marcus's education at prestigious schools. He had attended baseball games and science fairs and school plays, arriving punctually with flowers for the teachers. He had shown up. And yet, sometime between Marcus's 18th birthday and his 32 years of age, they had become enemies arguing over the terms of a contract, rather than family arguing over hurt feelings. The recess came as a mercy. Brian stood slowly, his knees protesting, and made his way to the hallway, where the light was harsh and fluorescent. His attorney, a woman named Judith Chen, who billed at $300 per hour and showed no signs of understanding him, patted his arm with practiced sympathy. "He's rattled," she said. "That's good for us. Jurors don't like emotional outbursts. It makes him look unstable." Brian nodded because he was supposed to. He didn't mention that his son's rage was the most honest thing that had happened in weeks. He didn't mention that Marcus's anger was proof that he still cared enough to be furious, and wasn't that something? Wasn't that better than indifference? He found himself in the men's restroom, gripping the sink with both hands, staring at his own reflection. When had he become this person? The man who had to hire lawyers to speak to his son. When had the walls gone up so high that they required legal demolition? The answer came to him unbidden, in a memory he usually kept locked away. Marcus was 24, fresh out of college, working at an investment firm his father had recommended. There had been a company dinner. Brian's new wife, Marcus's stepmother, though they'd never used that term, had said something cutting about Marcus's girlfriend, something about her being ambitious in the way that suggested limited options. It was meant to be funny. It wasn't funny. Marcus had left without eating. He didn't call for 3 months. When he finally did, it was only to arrange a time to pick up some boxes of his belongings from the house. Brian had tried to fix it with money then too. He'd offered to fund a trip. He'd offered to invest in Marcus's first business venture. He'd offered everything except an apology for not defending him, for laughing along with his wife, for choosing comfort over his son. The pattern had repeated itself across 14 years, each iteration creating another layer of scar tissue between them. When court resumed, it was Brian's turn to testify. He walked to the witness box, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. The oath felt blasphemous on his lips. He wasn't sure what truth meant anymore. Judith's questions were designed to build sympathy. She asked about the burden of managing the estate. She asked about his intentions. She asked him to explain his reasoning for each decision, each investment, each action. And Brian answered dutifully, mechanically, like a robot performing the function it was programmed for. Then Marcus's attorney stood. His name was Richard Samuels, and he had the particular cruelty of a man who'd grown wealthy, making other people's shame profitable. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, circling like a shark, "you made these decisions about your son's inheritance without consulting him. Not once, not in 6 years. Correct. I believed I was acting in his best interest. But did you know? Did you ask your son what he wanted?" Brian opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said finally. "In fact, when your son attempted to call you 3 years ago to discuss his concerns about the portfolio, you didn't take his call, did you? Your assistant told him you were in a meeting. I don't recall. You don't recall whether you were available to speak to your own son about his own money." The words were landing, each one a small injury. But Brian didn't object. He let them all land because he deserved them. Because they were true. When he stepped down from the witness box, he didn't look at Marcus. He couldn't. The verdict came 3 weeks later. The judge found in Marcus's favor. Not completely. Brian wasn't required to pay restitution. But the court determined that he had acted beyond his authority and that Marcus was entitled to take full control of his remaining inheritance. It was a legal rebuke. It was also an emotional one, and everyone knew it. Brian shook Judith's hand, wrote her another check, and walked out of the courthouse into the September heat. He sat on a bench facing the street and watched people move past him with their ordinary lives. A woman with a stroller. A teenager in school colors. A man in a suit talking on his phone, laughing. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Marcus. He deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Then, instead of typing, he called. Marcus answered on the 4th ring. "My lawyer said I shouldn't speak to you." "I know," Brian said. "I'm not calling as your father. I'm calling as the man who was sitting in that courtroom. I need to tell you something, and I need to do it while I still have the courage. Make it quick. Everything you said in court, everything you looked like when you said it, I deserve that. I've been trying to buy my way past 14 years of being a coward. I let your mother down. I let you down. And when you grew up and became someone I couldn't control with money or recommendations or being in the room, I just stopped trying to actually know you. I stopped actually listening." Marcus said nothing. Brian could hear traffic in the background. Maybe Marcus was driving. Maybe he was walking away. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Brian continued. "I'm not asking anything. I just needed you to know that you were right. Everything you were angry about, it was all true. I saw it in the courtroom. I finally saw it. Congratulations on your belated awakening," Marcus said, and his voice was cold. But he didn't hang up. "I want to do this differently," Brian said. "I want to know who you are now. Not the child I raised, but the man you became without me. I want to know about your girlfriend and your work and what you care about. I want to know if you like coffee in the morning or if you sleep late. I want to know if you have nightmares or if you dream in color. I want to know you, and I'll do it without money, without conditions, without keeping score. Just, if you'd let me." The silence stretched long enough that Brian thought he'd lost the connection. Then Marcus said, "That's not something you get over a phone call." "No," Brian agreed. "It's not. There's a coffee place near my office. On 5th and Madison. I go there sometimes on Saturday mornings. I don't know if I'll be there," Brian said. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm 55 years old," Brian said. I'm finally starting to understand that promises only matter if you keep them when it's hard. I'll be there." He hung up before Marcus could change his mind. He sat on that bench for another hour, watching the city move around him. The verdict was in, and it wasn't the one his lawyer had wanted, but it wasn't the one his son had wanted either, not really. What Marcus wanted was what Brian wanted too. The possibility that they might still find each other, that love might survive even the wreckage of lawyers and courtrooms and 14 years of small betrayals. On Saturday morning, Brian arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early. He sat in a corner booth where he could see the door. He ordered black coffee and didn't drink it. His hands were shaking again, but this time they were shaking with something like hope. When Marcus walked in, wearing jeans and a jacket, carrying himself with the confidence of a man Brian almost didn't recognize, he looked exactly like his mother had looked at 32. Determined and cautious and carrying the weight of being hurt by someone who was supposed to protect him. Brian stood. He didn't try to hug. He didn't try to buy anything. He simply stood there as an offering and said, "Thank you for coming." Marcus sat down slowly, like he was still deciding whether to stay. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You still have to earn it." Brian nodded. Outside, the city moved past them. Inside, in that small booth with cold coffee between them, two strangers who shared blood and history began the slow work of becoming family again.